I discovered that my wife's so-called girls' trip was actually a romantic getaway with her lover. They were utterly blindsided when I showed up at the resort, divorce papers in hand. She had left home that morning, all smiles, insisting it was just a fun trip with her friends. But deep down, I already knew everything. I had a plan, and there was nothing that could prepare them for what I was about to do. This has been one of the hardest experiences of my life. Realizing that my marriage has been a lie for months has shaken me to my core. I've spent countless hours reading about relationships, trying to recognize the signs of a troubled marriage. All that research made me more alert to subtle changes in behavior, and it's what helped me piece together the truth. My wife, Emma, not her real name, was not the person I thought she was, and I'd been blind to it for years. I always believed our relationship was special, unlike others. Now I see I was just being naive. Emma and I have been married for almost 6 years. We met in a pretty unusual way, at a Best Buy, of all places. I was hunting for parts to build a new PC, completely absorbed in the spec sheets, when she approached me, looking a little lost in the monitor section. She explained she was putting together her first gaming setup and needed advice. We clicked instantly, bonding over our shared love for technology. I helped her pick out the perfect monitor, and after that, we went for coffee. She told me about her job as a software developer, and since I was working in the same field, we had endless things to talk about. Our relationship moved fast. We dated for 3 years, eventually moving in together and adopting a cat. I proposed during a trip to Seattle, where we attended a gaming convention. Our wedding was small and intimate, just the way we wanted it. But looking back now, all those happy memories feel like a dream. Everything seemed perfect at the time, but it was far from real. Emma had 2 close friends, Hannah and Lily, who had been inseparable with her since college. The 3 of them shared weekly calls, took trips together, and celebrated major milestones as a group. Over the years, I got along with them well enough, not best friends, but friendly. We'd hang out at parties, go out as couples since they were both married, and they were always around for big moments like our engagement party or housewarming. The first red flag came when I arrived home early from work one day and found Emma on a call with Hannah and Lily. She was in the home office, but her whole demeanor shifted the second I walked in. Usually, she was relaxed and open during their chats, but this time she seemed stiff, awkward, and almost forced in her casual tone. When I joked about their plans, she brushed me off with a vague comment about the weekend. The interaction felt off, especially since she was typically open about her conversations with them. After I left the room, I lingered near the office door, curious about her strange behavior. I overheard her whispering, something she never did during calls. They were talking about a trip and kept mentioning him and his in ways that didn't fit the girls' trip to Cape Verde she'd told me about. Emma had mentioned this trip weeks earlier, framing it as one of their usual yearly getaways, like the Vegas weekend last summer or the skiing trip to Colorado the year before. I even thought about joining them since I had some vacation days saved up, but Emma hesitated when I suggested it. She talked about how it was a tradition for just the 3 of them, and I didn't push the idea. After she hung up, her attitude completely changed. She came over while I was working, hugging me and acting overly affectionate. We'd always been close, but this felt different, like she was trying to cover something up. It reminded me of how she acted last year during a rough patch when she was working late with a new project team. She'd come home late and be unusually attentive, almost as if she was guilty about something. Later, while she was in the shower, I decided to check her phone. We'd always shared passwords. It started as a practical thing in case of emergencies, but this time felt different. Instead of the usual chat full of memes and complaints about husbands, I found something else entirely. Their conversation wasn't about a girl's trip, it was about her trip. Messages were full of emojis and excited remarks like, "He's going to love this bikini," and "Don't forget to take lots of pictures for us." It read like teenagers planning a secret rendezvous, not three married women in their 30s. The deeper I scrolled, the worse it got. Among the usual chatter about work and family were secretive exchanges about someone named Evan. Then, I saw the photos, images of a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a dating app, posing shirtless by a lake. One picture had him with his arm around Emma in what looked like a restaurant. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago, a night she claimed to be out with coworkers. The group chat was even more damning. Her friends were hyping her up, commenting on how great she and Evan looked together and how much fun they'd have on the trip. Hannah even wrote, "You two are going to have the best time." Complete with a string of heart emojis. The same Hannah who sat at my dinner table last week, laughing and chatting like everything was normal. That night, I put her phone back where I found it and drove aimlessly around the neighborhood for an hour, trying to process everything. When I got home, Emma was worried, asking why I'd left without saying anything. I made up a story about needing to clear my head after a tough call with a client. We even sat on the couch and watched TV together, her snuggled against me like nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, I was on my phone, researching divorce laws and formulating a plan. Just walking away felt too simple, I needed to make a statement. I couldn't shake the thought that she'd move on with Brian, his new name, and eventually bring him into the home we built together. That image alone made my stomach churn. I needed to know who this guy was, the man my wife had chosen over the life we shared. Using just his first name and the city where they'd met, I started searching online, hoping social media would give me some clues. More than just finding out about him, I wanted to make it crystal clear to both of them that they couldn't walk away from this betrayal without facing the consequences. The deceit wasn't limited to Emma, it extended to her friends, too. People who had eaten at my table, laughed at my jokes, and pretended to care, all while helping plan this romantic getaway. As I combed through forums for advice, someone suggested confronting them at their resort. At first, the idea of shelling out thousands of dollars on last-minute flights and hotel bookings for a confrontation seemed ridiculous. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. I had all the details of their trip from Emma's chats. Showing up unannounced with divorce papers would let me catch them red-handed. Sure, it would be costly, especially with attorney fees piling up, but seeing their faces would make every cent worth it. Update 1. Reflecting on these past 2 weeks, my life feels like the plot of one of those revenge movies I always thought were far-fetched. It all started when I uncovered that Emma's so-called girls' trip to Cape Verde was actually a romantic getaway with Brian. People on Reddit had warned me that these trips often weren't what they seemed, but I never imagined I'd become one of those cautionary tales. We'd even been talking about starting a family next year. Despite knowing everything, I acted like life was normal. We had dinner together, watched our favorite shows, and I even helped her pack for the trip. She kept chatting about how much fun she'd have with Hannah and Lily, showing me texts about spa days and beach activities. Meanwhile, I was working with a divorce lawyer and booking my own flight to Cape Verde. My lawyer and I spent hours ensuring the papers were airtight, including documentation of her affair-related expenses. He even recommended recording the confrontation for evidence. The last-minute flight cost nearly as much as our honeymoon, but I didn't care. It felt fitting to dip into our emergency savings. This was, after all, an emergency. I booked a room at the same resort, thankfully not on the same floor as theirs. The morning of her flight, I played the role of the doting husband, driving her to the airport. She wore a beach outfit and the expensive sun hat I'd bought her for her birthday. As she walked through security, I kept an eye out for Brian but didn't see him. He was likely flying separately to avoid suspicion. While waiting for my evening flight, Emma sent me updates, selfies by her ocean view room, pictures of the infinity pool, and texts saying how much she missed me. Every message strengthened my resolve. My bag was packed light, just the divorce papers, a few clothes, and my phone for recording. After checking into the resort that night, I barely slept. I couldn't stop thinking about the life we'd built, the years we'd shared, and how it had all led to this moment. The next morning, I sent Emma a casual message asking about her plans. She responded with a selfie by the pool, mentioning she'd be sunbathing there before exploring the city. That was all the information I needed. I grabbed my backpack, made sure the divorce papers were secure, and headed out. It didn't take long to spot them. At the far end of the pool deck, Emma lay on a lounge chair in her new blue bikini, the one she'd claimed was for her friend's trip. Brian sat beside her, casually rubbing sunscreen on her legs. They looked completely at ease, like this was a routine for them. My heart pounded as I thought about every late night she said she was at work or out with friends. How many of those nights had she really been with him? I started recording on my phone and slid it discreetly into my shirt pocket, as my lawyer had advised. Standing there, watching them together, felt surreal. Brian noticed me first, giving me a quick glance before dismissing me as just another guest. He continued chatting with Emma about their dinner plans, completely unaware of who I was. Emma, eyes closed behind her sunglasses, seemed blissfully content in his attention, while I was supposed to be at home working. Eventually, Brian looked at me again, this time more annoyed, and asked, "Can I help you?" That's when Emma noticed me. She bolted upright so quickly she spilled her drink. Rubbing her eyes, she stared at me in shock, her mouth hanging open. Her reaction said it all. She'd never expected me to find out, let alone confront them here. Without saying a word, I pulled the manila envelope from my backpack and handed it to her. She took it, already suspecting what was inside. We just signed refinancing papers for the house last month, so she recognized legal documents immediately. Meanwhile, Brian stood up, puffing out his chest like he was ready to fight. Guys like him are a dime a dozen, gym types who think they can intimidate anyone. He placed a hand on my chest and tried to shove me back, his voice full of false bravado as he told me to leave. Emma tried to pull him back, probably remembering how I'd dealt with a drunk guy who got aggressive with her a few weeks earlier. But Brian kept pushing, literally. When his shove got more aggressive, I pushed back. Hard. He stumbled over a lounge chair and fell straight into the pool. The sight of him flailing in the water was too much. I laughed, and so did a few other guests. Some even started recording. Emma panicked, scrambling for excuses. "It's not what it looks like," she cried. The absurdity of her words hit me hard. She was in a bikini with another man at a couple's resort, and she thought I'd believe her lies. I asked her about Hannah and Lily, knowing full well they weren't here. She opened the envelope just enough to confirm the divorce papers inside, then slammed it shut like that could somehow undo everything. She started crying, not the quiet tears I'd seen when her dad was sick, but loud, dramatic sobs that drew even more attention. Brian climbed out of the pool, drenched and furious, clearly spoiling for a fight. Before he could try anything, a group of guys from a nearby cabana stepped in, mentioning hotel security was on its way. That was my cue to leave. I turned away from the pool area, leaving the chaos I'd caused without a second glance. Emma, changed to rose earlier, tried to follow me, clutching the divorce papers in her hands, but froze when I shot her a glare. Back in my room, I quickly packed my bag. The front desk staff seemed curious about my early checkout, likely already aware of the commotion by the pool. Despite their concerned looks, they called me a taxi without question. The entire confrontation lasted less than half an hour. I had swept through like a hurricane and was gone just as quickly. I spent 6 hours at the airport, sitting at an overpriced bar near my gate. The bartender kept refilling my coffee as I replayed the video I'd taken. There they were, clear as day, my wife and her lover at a luxury resort we couldn't even afford on our combined salaries. The timestamp on the video was perfect evidence for the divorce proceedings. The whole ordeal, between flights, the hotel, and other travel expenses, cost me nearly $4,000, but having that undeniable proof made every penny worth it. That night, back home, I turned off my phone and slept better than I had in weeks, ever since discovering her messages. 2 days later, Emma showed up at the house, still dressed in her beach clothes, looking like she hadn't slept. She burst into tears, begging to explain. She insisted Brian was just a friend from work and claimed nothing serious had happened between them. The same tired excuses she had given during her late nights at the office. I cut her off and told her to pack her things and go to her sister's house. Her sister had always given me odd, knowing looks at family gatherings, and now I understood why. Over the next few days, I heard nothing from Emma, not a single call or message. I imagine she finally realized there was no fixing this. Even her friends, Hannah and Lily, stayed silent. I guess they knew exactly how complicit they were in this mess. Yesterday, I changed the locks on the house and moved all her plants from the yard into the garage. Update 2. After months of stress and legal battles, I can finally close this chapter of my life. The divorce is finalized, and for the first time in a long while, I feel like myself again. Discovering Emma's affair shattered every illusion I had about our marriage, but at least now I have the truth. And, as petty as it sounds, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing her carefully planned getaway ended in disaster. The video of Brian falling into the pool has become a running joke among my friends. They love sharing it, even though I've asked them repeatedly to stop. About a week after the Cape Verde incident, Emma sent me a long, rambling message. She claimed she needed space to reflect, as if she were the one who needed time to process what had happened. Her sister even called, asking me to be patient and understanding because Emma was going through a lot. The betrayal ran far deeper than just Emma. Her entire circle of friends knew about Brian and actively encouraged the relationship. Hannah and Lily, bridesmaids at our wedding, had helped plan her romantic getaway. There was no coming back from this level of deceit. Seeing Emma and Brian together at that resort, acting like infatuated teenagers, erased any lingering doubts about ending the marriage. My lawyer was phenomenal, handling everything with precision. The video of the resort confrontation was indisputable evidence, showing Emma with another man on a trip supposedly for her friends. We also had screenshots of her group chats and records of suspicious financial transactions. My lawyer highlighted unexplained Uber rides to parts of the city Emma had no reason to visit, extravagant restaurant bills clearly meant for two, and even a hotel reservation from 3 months earlier when she had claimed to be at a work conference. As we dug deeper into our financial records, it was like uncovering a hidden life. There were purchases at luxury lingerie stores on days she said she was shopping for work clothes, coffee shop receipts near Brian's office, and other small transactions that painted a clear picture. The most damning evidence was a receipt from a jewelry store. Emma had bought Brian an expensive watch for his birthday while claiming she was picking out a gift for her father. Every new discovery only confirmed that divorce was the right decision. The settlement turned out better than I expected. Emma's lawyer initially demanded half of everything, but when we presented the evidence of her affair-related expenses, they quickly backed down. I kept the house, the car, and most of our savings. Emma received only 30% of the savings, far less than she would have gotten under normal circumstances. The judge was especially unimpressed that she'd used joint funds to finance the affair, including the Cape Verde trip. I also got custody of our dog, Max, formerly Robin, which was a huge relief since I'd always been the one taking care of him. Emma's family was stunned when they found out. Her parents, who had treated me like a son for the past 9 years, were speechless when I explained everything. Her father, who used to boast about how I was the perfect match for his daughter, had nothing to say. Her mother, who often invited me over for Sunday dinners, kept asking if I was absolutely sure. I showed them the video from the resort and walked them through the lies their daughter had told. They had to face the truth: Emma had thrown everything away for an affair. Uncovering Brian's identity was an unexpected twist. A quick search through Emma's Facebook friends revealed he was a regional sales manager for a competing tech company. Married with 2 kids, his profile was full of idyllic family photos, beach vacations, little league games, birthday dinners. His wife looked like she belonged in a lifestyle magazine, and their home was straight out of a suburban dream, complete with a white picket fence and a perfect garden. Yet, somehow, none of that was enough for him. In a strange, twisted way, it almost made sense that Emma and Brian ended up together, 2 people willing to risk and ultimately destroy their marriages for a fleeting thrill. But contacting Brian's wife, Laura, changed, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. After wrestling with the decision, I finally sent her a message explaining who I was. I included the video I'd taken at the resort, along with screenshots from Emma's group chat. At first, Laura was defensive. She accused me of trying to stir up trouble and even suggested I might have doctored the video. She talked about their 15 years of marriage, their kids, their college fund, and the anniversary trips they'd taken as a family. But as she went through the evidence, especially the dates that matched Brian's business trips, it all began to fall into place for her. Her initial disbelief gave way to shock, then anger, and finally a quiet, determined resolve. A week later, she replied to my message. She thanked me for telling her the truth about her marriage and shared that she had already hired a divorce lawyer. She had moved out of their home and was staying with her sister. It was heartbreaking to see how my message had upended her life, but at the same time, it felt like justice was being served. The fallout from this entire ordeal has been both intense and, in some ways, satisfying. Both marriages came to an end, not because of misunderstandings or mistakes, but because 2 people made selfish, irreversible choices. Somehow, the video of Brian falling into the pool ended up circulating on social media. I can't say for certain how it got there, but I also can't deny it might have been my doing. HR at his company couldn't have been too pleased to see their regional sales manager publicly humiliated at a resort. I've heard through mutual friends that Brian's life fell apart after that. He relocated to another state, likely in search of a fresh start, though I doubt it will erase what happened. As for Emma, she's living at her sister's house while looking for an apartment. She's probably realizing that a few months of excitement have cost her a stable marriage, our dream home, and the majority of our savings. The lesson here is straightforward: if you can't stay faithful, don't get married. Secrets have a way of coming to light, and when they do, the consequences are often far worse than anyone anticipates. Commentary, optional add-on. What a whirlwind of a story, right? It's gut-wrenching to imagine the pain of discovering that someone you've trusted for years has been living a double life. Yet, there's something inspiring about how the original poster, handled the situation. He faced it head-on, took control, and refused to let betrayal define him. This story serves as a powerful reminder that the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, you have to muster the courage to confront it and move forward. Here's hoping the OP finds peace and happiness in this new chapter of his life. What did you think about this dramatic twist? Let me know your thoughts, and if you've come across the infamous pool video, feel free to share it in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot. And if you're ready for more, check out the other stories waiting for you here. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Life after the divorce was a strange mix of chaos and calm. On one hand, the legal battles were behind me, and I no longer had to deal with Emma's lies. But on the other, I was left with the wreckage of what had once been my life. The house, which I had fought so hard to keep, felt unbearably empty. Every corner was a reminder of the future we had planned but would never have. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft padding of Max's paws as he followed me from room to room. For weeks, I lived in a haze, going through the motions but feeling detached from everything. Friends and family tried to reach out, but I wasn't ready to talk. How do you explain to people that the person you loved most in the world wasn't who you thought they were? The betrayal had shaken me to my core, not just in my relationship with Emma, but in how I viewed people in general. Trusting anyone again felt impossible. But life doesn't pause, even when you want it to. Bills had to be paid, work deadlines loomed, and Max still needed his daily walks. Those walks became my sanctuary. There was something therapeutic about being outside, moving forward, literally and figuratively, while Max explored every bush and lamppost like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. It reminded me that there was still joy to be found, even in the smallest moments. A glimpse into Emma's world. From what little I heard through mutual friends, Emma's life wasn't going so smoothly. She'd managed to find a small apartment, but it was a far cry from the home we had built together. Her job was still stable, but rumors had started spreading in her office about her affair with Brian, and it was clear her reputation had taken a hit. Brian, meanwhile, had disappeared from her life entirely. Whether he ghosted her out of shame or she realized he wasn't worth the trouble, I didn't know. But I found a bitter sense of satisfaction in knowing their love story had crumbled as quickly as it had begun. Mutual friends hinted that Emma was struggling emotionally, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Choices have consequences, and she had made hers. Rediscovering myself. One night, about 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting on the couch with a beer in hand, scrolling through old photos. There we were, smiling at a hiking trail, laughing over board games with friends, posing with Max in front of the Christmas tree. It struck me how happy I had looked in those moments, completely unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. And that's when it hit me, I had been happy, not because of Emma, but because of who I was back then. Somewhere along the way, I had lost touch with that version of myself. I had let my life revolve around her, her needs, her plans, and I had forgotten how to just be me. That realization was both painful and liberating. If I could find happiness once, I could find it again. But this time, it would be on my terms. I started making small changes. I reached out to old friends I had lost touch with, went to the gym for the first time in years, and even signed up for a cooking class. It was awkward at first, stepping into a room full of strangers and realizing I was the only one there without a partner. But as the weeks went by, I started looking forward to those classes. There was something rewarding about creating something from scratch, even if my first few attempts at soufflés were more charcoal than fluffy. New connections. It was during one of those cooking classes that I met Sarah. She was standing at the next station, struggling to crack an egg without making a mess. I offered her a tip, pressed the shell lightly against the edge of the bowl instead of smashing it, and we ended up chatting for the rest of the class. She was funny, down to earth, and had a laugh that was infectious. Over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other at class, and before I knew it, we were grabbing coffee after each session. She'd just come out of a long-term relationship herself, and there was an unspoken understanding between us. Neither of us was ready to rush into anything, but it felt good to talk to someone who understood what it was like to rebuild your life after heartbreak. Closure with Emma. About 6 months after the divorce, Emma reached out. She wanted to meet, saying she had some things she needed to say. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop, not one we had ever been to together, which felt like a small but important boundary. She looked different. There was a tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, and she seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of her choices had physically diminished her. She apologized, genuinely, for everything. For the lies, the betrayal, the hurt she had caused. She admitted she didn't fully understand why she had done what she did, only that she had felt restless and thought something new and exciting would fix it. Her words didn't absolve her, but they gave me a sense of closure. I told her I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying around anger and resentment wasn't helping me move forward. By the time we left the coffee shop, I felt lighter, like I had finally let go of the last piece of the burden I'd been carrying. Moving forward. Life didn't magically fall into place after that, but it started to feel normal again. Sarah and I continued seeing each other, though we were both careful to take things slow. Max seemed happier too, probably because I was finally in a better place emotionally. Looking back, I realized the most important lesson I had learned wasn't just about trust or betrayal, it was about resilience. People will let you down, even the ones you think you know best. But that doesn't mean you stop living, stop trusting, or stop loving. It just means you learn to be more intentional about the people you let into your life. A final reflection. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here, feeling at peace with everything that happened, I wouldn't have believed you. The journey wasn't easy, and there were plenty of moments when I wanted to give up. But now, as I sit in my newly renovated living room, Max curled up at my feet, and Sarah texting me about a new recipe she wants to try, I realized that losing Emma wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I'm finally writing my own narrative. Life doesn't move on its own, you have to push it forward. After that meeting with Emma, I spent days reflecting on what she had said. Her words, while genuine, didn't undo the damage or change the outcome. What they did, however, was remind me of the fragility of everything we build with others. Relationships, no matter how solid they seem, are delicate constructs. And yet, as I thought more about it, I realized how much of my own identity I had tied to Emma and our life together. Without her, I felt unmoored, but I also felt a strange sense of freedom, like I was finally allowed to ask myself what I really wanted. The house, as much as I had fought to keep it, started to feel like an anchor. Every corner was filled with memories that didn't belong to my current life. The couch where we'd binge-watch shows, the dining table where we hosted her friends, the patio where she'd sit with a glass of wine, it was all too heavy. One day, while walking Max, the thought hit me, I didn't have to stay here. I had the house, sure, but I didn't need to keep living in it. I didn't owe it to anyone to hold on to this place like it was some monument to a failed marriage. That weekend, I called a realtor. Within 2 months, the house was on the market. It sold faster than I expected, and I found myself standing in an empty living room, Max sitting by my feet, as the last of the movers hauled out my boxes. I didn't feel sad watching it go, I felt relieved, like I was shedding a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. With the proceeds from the sale, I decided to start fresh. I moved into a small loft downtown, closer to work and within walking distance of some great parks for Max. The loft was nothing like the suburban house I'd left behind, exposed brick, big windows, and just enough space for the essentials. It felt like a blank canvas, and for the first time in a long while, I was excited to create something new. Sarah and I had kept in touch, though we weren't officially dating yet. She'd occasionally come over, bringing pastries from a bakery she swore by, and we'd sit on the floor of my still-furnishing loft, talking for hours. She was different from Emma in every possible way. Where Emma had been calculated and polished, Sarah was raw and genuine. She didn't try to impress, she just showed up as herself, and that was enough. One evening, after a particularly long conversation about nothing and everything, she looked at me and said, "You're not the same person you were when we met." I asked her what she meant, and she smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "When I met you, it was like you were trying to prove something, to yourself, to everyone. Now, you just seem free." Her words stuck with me. Maybe I had changed. Maybe I was finally learning how to live for myself instead of someone else. It felt good to hear that from someone who had no stake in my past, no preconceived notions of who I was supposed to be. Work became a refuge for me during this time. I threw myself into projects, staying late at the office, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My boss noticed, and within a few months, I was offered a promotion. The extra responsibilities were a welcome distraction, but they also gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder, it was about proving to myself that I was capable of thriving, even after everything. Emma reached out occasionally, though her messages became fewer and far between. She seemed to have accepted that there was no path back to what we had, and for that, I was grateful. The last time we spoke, she mentioned moving out of state to be closer to her family. I wished her well, and that was the end of it. Brian, as far as I knew, had vanished entirely. Mutual friends said his wife had followed through with the divorce and sold their house. He wasn't at his old job anymore, and no one seemed to know where he'd gone. Part of me wanted to know, to have some closure about his role in all of this, but another part of me was glad he was gone. It was easier to move forward without the shadow of his presence lingering. Max became my constant companion through it all. Every morning, we'd walk the same route, past the coffee shop where the barista knew my order by heart, through the park where he'd chase squirrels and bark at ducks. Those moments, as mundane as they were, grounded me. They reminded me that life wasn't about the big, dramatic events, it was about the small, quiet ones that made up the spaces in between. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and watched Max sniff around a patch of grass, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: contentment. It wasn't a flashy, overwhelming emotion. It was quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying. For the first time, I wasn't looking back at what I'd lost or forward to what I might gain. I was just here, in this moment, and that was enough. Sarah became a bigger part of my life as the months went on. She wasn't trying to fill the void Emma had left, and I wasn't looking for her to. What we had was something entirely new, something built on mutual respect and understanding. It wasn't perfect, we both carried scars from our pasts, but it was real. One evening, as we sat on the couch with Max curled up between us, she looked at me and said, "I think we're going to be okay." I didn't ask what she meant. I just smiled and said, "Yeah, I think so too." Life didn't magically become easy after that. There were still days when the weight of everything hit me, when I'd catch myself wondering how things might have been if Emma had made different choices. But those moments became fewer and farther between. The past was a part of me, sure, but it didn't define me anymore. I started traveling more, something I'd always wanted to do but never prioritized. Max stayed with Sarah when I was away, and every time I came back, it felt a little more like coming home. The loft, once a blank canvas, was now filled with pieces of a life I was proud of, a bookshelf overflowing with books I'd finally had time to read, photos from trips I'd taken, and Max's toys scattered across the floor. One night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far I'd come. A year ago, I'd been a broken man, reeling from betrayal and struggling to find my footing. Now, I was someone else entirely, stronger, wiser, and, most importantly, free. The truth is, the end of my marriage wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of something new, something I was still writing, one small, beautiful moment at a time. The loft slowly became more than just a space, it became my sanctuary. It wasn't perfect, but that's what I loved about it. The exposed brick walls and uneven hardwood floors gave it character, a sense of uniqueness I hadn't felt in my old suburban home. Every piece of furniture, every decoration was something I chose, not something I compromised on or picked to match Emma's aesthetic. It was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a space that truly reflected me. Max adapted to city life as well as I did. Our morning walks through the park became a ritual, and I found myself smiling more as I watched him dart after squirrels or roll around in the grass. He'd become my anchor in the chaos, a reminder that no matter how turbulent life got, there was always something constant, something loyal. Work continued to be a stabilizing force. The promotion brought new responsibilities and challenges, but I embraced them. Late nights at the office no longer felt like an escape, they felt like progress. My team noticed the change in me too. One of my colleagues even joked, "You're like a machine these days. Did you download some productivity software we don't know about?" I laughed it off, but the truth was, I had something to prove, not to Emma, not to Brian, but to myself. I needed to know I could thrive on my own terms. Sarah and I grew closer in ways I didn't expect. We weren't rushing into a relationship, and that made all the difference. Every coffee date, every cooking class, every walk with Max felt like an exploration of who we were individually and together. She had her own scars, her own fears, but she didn't hide them, and that honesty was refreshing. We talked about everything, our pasts, our dreams, even our fears about moving forward. One evening, while we were making pasta in my tiny kitchen, she paused, flour dusting her hands, and said, "I don't want to be a rebound for you." Her words hit me like a truck. She wasn't accusing me, she was just being honest. I set down the rolling pin and looked her in the eye. "You're not a rebound, Sarah. If anything, you're a reminder that I can build something real again." Her smile in that moment was worth every ounce of vulnerability it took to say those words. We didn't label what we had, but we didn't need to. It was enough to know that we were both moving forward, one step at a time. Not everything was smooth sailing. There were moments when memories of Emma would surface unexpectedly, a song on the radio, a familiar scent, or a place we used to visit. For a while, those memories felt like weights, pulling me back into the past. But over time, they started to feel lighter, less like reminders of what I'd lost and more like lessons about how far I'd come. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old box of belongings, I found a stack of letters Emma had written to me during our first year of dating. They were full of hope and love, promises of a future we both believed in back then. I sat on the floor, reading them one by one, and instead of anger or sadness, I felt gratitude. Those moments had been real, even if they didn't last. They had shaped me, taught me what I wanted and, more importantly, what I wouldn't settle for again. Around the same time, I got an unexpected email from Emma. She'd moved to a new city and wanted to let me know she was starting therapy. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation, she simply wanted to acknowledge the pain she'd caused and express her hope that I was finding happiness. It was a short, simple message, but it meant more than I expected. I didn't reply, but I didn't need to. Her email felt like the final page of a chapter one was ready to close. Sarah and I eventually transitioned into a relationship, though it happened so naturally that neither of us could pinpoint when things changed. She started spending more time at the loft, and Max adored her almost as much as I did. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, she turned to me and said, "You know, I think Max likes me better than he likes you." I laughed, knowing full well she was probably right. We began exploring the city together, trying new restaurants, visiting art galleries, and even taking weekend trips to nearby towns. Each adventure felt like another brick in the foundation of a life we were quietly building together. She wasn't trying to replace Emma, and I wasn't trying to replace her ex. We were just two people figuring out how to be happy again. The first time she told me she loved me, it caught me off guard. We were at a dog park, watching Max chase after a frisbee, when she turned to me and said it, almost casually, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't say it back right away, not because I didn't feel it, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't saying it out of habit. Later that night, as we sat on the balcony of my loft, I looked at her and said, "I love you too." The smile that spread across her face was worth every moment of hesitation. As the seasons changed, so did I. The person I saw in the mirror wasn't the same man who had stood at the edge of that pool, divorce papers in hand. He wasn't even the same man who had spent hours at the airport bar, replaying a video of betrayal. He was someone new, someone who had learned that life doesn't end when things fall apart, it just shifts, creating space for something else. One day, Sarah and I were walking through the park, Max trotting happily ahead of us, when she said, "Do you ever think about what's next?" I looked at her, a little surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "You've rebuilt so much. You've got your work, this new life, us. What's the next big thing for you?" Her question lingered in my mind long after we got home. What was next? For so long, my focus had been on surviving, on getting through the aftermath of everything with Emma and Brian. Now that I had stability, what did I want? The answer didn't come all at once, but over time, I realized I wanted more, not in a greedy, desperate way, but in a way that felt hopeful. I started thinking about the things I'd always put off, traveling to places I'd only read about, learning a new language, maybe even starting a side project outside of work. Sarah was supportive of every idea, encouraging me to dream bigger than I ever had before. Together, we made plans, not just for the immediate future but for the kind of life we wanted to build together. The journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't without setbacks. There were moments of doubt, moments when the scars of the past felt too fresh to ignore. But those moments became fewer and farther between, replaced by moments of joy, connection, and quiet contentment. Max, as always, remained the steady presence in it all, his wagging tail a constant reminder that sometimes the simplest things bring the most happiness. Life had thrown me into a storm, but I had come out the other side, not just intact, but stronger. The loft, the work, the love I'd found with Sarah, they weren't just new chapters, they were a whole new story. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would go next.